January 1945. Eastern France. Snow presses flat against the ground, broken only by boot prints and shell scars. The gunfire has moved on. For a moment, the war sounds distant. A lone American infantryman stands still. His rifle is no longer pointed forward. German voices surround him, close, casual, unconcerned. Helmets bob in the white haze. Hands gesture. Orders are exchanged. This looks like the end of a small story. Another captured soldier, another name headed for a ledger. But something is wrong. The Germans do not search him carefully. They do not spread out. They stand too close, close enough to hear breathing, close enough to assume control has already been taken. They have no idea who they are dealing with. They have no idea how quickly violence can return. Less than a minute later, the snow will be torn apart by gunfire and explosions. German infantrymen will fall where they stand. Others will run without firing a shot. When the smoke clears, the number will be counted quietly. 21 enemy soldiers down. The official reports will not dramatize it. History will barely pause on it. But this moment, brief, brutal, and irreversible, will reveal something the war never stopped teaching. That survival often belongs to the man everyone underestimates. And that realization leads directly into how this battlefield, and this war, reached that frozen minute. By January 1945, the war in Western Europe had entered its most deceptive phase. On maps in Allied headquarters, victory seemed inevitable. Paris had been liberated months earlier. Belgium was back in Allied hands. The German border itself was no longer distant. But on the ground, the fighting had grown more dangerous, not less. Only weeks before, Hitler had launched his last major offensive in the West, the Ardennes attack, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. It failed strategically, but it succeeded in one critical way. It exhausted everyone. American infantry divisions were under strength. Replacement soldiers arrived with minimal training. Veterans carried weeks of fatigue in their bodies. The German army was breaking, but it was breaking unevenly. Entire units were gone. Fuel was scarce. Artillery ammunition was rationed. Yet German infantry doctrine remained intact. Small groups still knew how to move, ambush, probe, and capture. In the forests and villages of eastern France, the war no longer looked like sweeping arrows on a map. It looked like sudden encounters at 50 meters, sometimes less. This was the moment when the Western Front became a war of fragments. Platoons lost contact. Squads became isolated by snow, smoke, and shattered roads. A single soldier could find himself separated without realizing it, and when that happened, the rules changed. For German troops, capturing Allied soldiers had become routine. Prisoners meant intelligence. They meant labor. They meant leverage in a collapsing war. Many German units were instructed to avoid unnecessary firefights when capture was possible. For Allied infantrymen, capture carried a different meaning. The Geneva Convention still existed on paper, but late-war conditions made outcomes unpredictable. Marches in winter, short rations, units retreating under pressure. This strategic imbalance created a dangerous illusion. The illusion that a lone soldier was already defeated. And that illusion shaped how German troops behaved in close quarters, how they approached, how they relaxed, how they assumed the moment was already decided. That assumption would matter more than they realized, because the wider strategic collapse of the German army was pushing combat down to the smallest, most intimate scale of war. And it was at that scale, squad against man, breath against breath, that everything could turn in seconds. By the winter of 1944-45, German infantry units were operating under immense pressure, but their tactical habits had not disappeared. Training emphasized control of space, immediate dominance in close contact, and rapid decision-making at the lowest level. When German soldiers believed they had surrounded an enemy, They acted quickly, but not always carefully. Capturing an isolated Allied soldier was considered preferable to killing him. Prisoners could be searched, questioned, and sent rearward. This practice was especially common during short-range encounters in forests, villages, and broken terrain, where firing might expose a unit's position. But this doctrine carried risk. Late in the war, German formations were increasingly composed of mixed experience. Veterans fought alongside teenage conscripts and older reservists. NCO shortages meant discipline varied from unit to unit. In some cases, procedures that once demanded strict spacing and immediate disarmament became informal. That informality was dangerous. U.S. Army field manuals trained infantrymen to exploit exactly this kind of lapse. Soldiers were drilled to maintain composure under capture conditions, to wait, to observe, and to act decisively if an opportunity appeared. Instructors did not promise survival, but they emphasized one truth: proximity was power. Weapons used in these moments were not heavy or dramatic. They were personal, rifles already chambered, fragmentation grenades carried for last resort situations, submachine guns designed for close quarters. Winter amplified everything. Heavy coats slowed reaction times. Snow muffled movement but reflected sound. Visibility collapsed without warning. At 10 meters, a mistake could not be corrected. German units that closed too tightly around a prisoner surrendered their greatest advantage: distance. When they did, the encounter stopped being a capture and became something else entirely. In after-action reports from this period, these incidents appear briefly, described without emotion. Words like enemy infantry at close range and rapid engagement conceal how little time actually passed. What mattered was not strength or numbers. It was who moved first. And in one frozen encounter, the Germans would realize, far too late, that their assumptions had placed them inside the most dangerous space on the battlefield. Because what followed was not confusion or negotiation, but action measured in seconds. The encounter does not begin with violence. It begins with proximity. German infantrymen move in from multiple directions, boots crunching softly in the snow. Their weapons are low, not raised. The American soldier is alone now, cut off by terrain, smoke, and the slow drift of the front line. This is not a formal surrender. There is no line, no shouted command carried across distance. It is closer than that. Too close. They assume control because they believe it already exists. One soldier steps forward. Another angles to the side. No one spreads out far enough to create space. No one expects resistance. This is the fatal miscalculation. Late war conditions have changed the rhythm of capture. Fatigue dulls caution. Repetition creates habit. A lone man, isolated in winter terrain, looks finished. German doctrine says this moment should be brief. Secure the prisoner, search him, move on. But doctrine depends on discipline, and discipline depends on time, something the battlefield is no longer offering. The American does not rush. He does not panic. Years of training, reinforced by months at the front, have taught him that sudden movement draws fire. Stillness buys seconds. Seconds buy opportunity. The Germans are now inside the most dangerous zone in combat: arm's length, grenade distance, rifle muzzle distance, the space where numbers stop mattering and reaction time decides everything. Snow absorbs sound. Breath fogs the air. One German turns his head, distracted by movement somewhere behind him. Another shifts his footing, adjusting his grip. That is all it takes. There is no warning shout, no dramatic signal, just motion, sudden, practiced, irreversible. What happens next unfolds faster than memory can record. Later, those who examine the site will struggle to reconstruct the sequence. Witnesses will disagree on order but not outcome. The engagement does not last minutes. It does not even last one. It is a violent compression of force, released at point-blank range, against men who believed the moment was already over. In the space of a few breaths, the encounter ceases to be a capture and becomes something far more final. And once the first action is taken, there is no pause, only momentum carrying forward, 1 second into the next. The first rifle cracks, snow erupts around a falling helmet. A grenade follows, detonating with a muffled thump beneath the white drift. The Germans scramble, reacting too slowly, too close to one another. In that instant, the advantage of numbers disappears. The soldier's training, his calm under pressure, and his understanding of terrain combine with pure instinct. Every motion is precise. Every shot counts. 21 men, fully armed, fully confident seconds earlier, are now moving in chaos. Some dive for cover. Some freeze. Some are down before their minds can process what is happening. The soldier does not pause to count. He does not hesitate. He continues forward, using their proximity against them, exploiting gaps that a panicked mind opens automatically. The battlefield condenses into a corridor of white, black, and brown, snow, smoke, boots, helmets. Each second stretches impossibly long. Every breath could be the last. From outside, it may have looked like carnage erupting without reason. In reality, it was the culmination of thousands of small decisions. The German assumption of control, the soldier's training, the understanding of distance and reaction. Within less than a minute, the engagement is over. Silence returns almost instantly, broken only by the hiss of spent shells and the faint moan of wounded men. 21 German infantrymen lie motionless or fleeing, the shock of the encounter etched into those who survived. When the soldier steps back, the snow around him is scarred and trampled. Tracks show the sudden chaos. The frozen landscape has absorbed the violence and in doing so becomes a witness. Reports later will condense the incident to a few sterile lines. Enemy engaged at close range. Enemy casualties sustained. Position secured. But anyone who was there, friend or foe, knows the truth. In 45 seconds, the balance of fear and power had flipped entirely. And that shift, momentary yet absolute, had consequences far beyond the clearing. It would affect unit morale, the local command's assessment, and even how soldiers on both sides regarded the fragility of control in this war's closing months. The snow had barely settled when the full weight of the incident became clear. Allied forces, patrolling the fractured forest and small villages of eastern France, found a scene both terrifying and precise. 21 German soldiers lay either dead, wounded, or fleeing in disarray. Their weapons, scattered across the snow, reflected the pale winter light like silent testimony to the encounter. For the American soldier, there was no time for relief. He checked his rifle, counted ammunition, and ensured the immediate area was secure. Nearby units, still wary of German counterattacks, moved cautiously, trying to confirm reports. When word reached the platoon commander, it was met with disbelief. The numbers seemed impossible for a single-man engagement. Yet the evidence, helmet fragments, spent rounds, and frozen footprints, told an unarguable story. German losses went beyond the physical. Reports from captured or surviving soldiers described a breakdown in cohesion. Those who survived were shaken, some incapable of continuing without immediate reinforcement. The psychological impact on the local German infantry was significant. The belief that an isolated Allied soldier could inflict such damage sowed fear in units already exhausted by months of attrition. Commanders would note in after-action reports that close-quarters encounters were no longer predictable, and that underestimating isolated enemies could be catastrophic. On the Allied side, the incident became a quiet example of training and discipline prevailing under extreme conditions. The soldier received commendations not only for bravery but for his composure under duress. Yet official citations, always careful to avoid embellishment, minimized the sensational aspects, focusing instead on effectiveness and tactical result. Field reports simply recorded, position regained, Enemy casualties sustained. Prisoner engagement concluded successfully. The clearing itself remained a frozen monument to sudden violence. Tracks in the snow showed the rapid movements of both attacker and defender, tracing arcs of fear, reaction, and survival. Local terrain, tree lines, embankments, and shattered fences became part of the story, demonstrating how winter conditions amplified both danger and opportunity. Strategically, the encounter had little effect on broader operations. The Allies were advancing on multiple fronts, and the German collapse in the region was already underway. Yet in microcosm, this single engagement illustrated the fragile balance of power in late-war skirmishes. Numbers alone could not guarantee control. Training, awareness, and psychological advantage could outweigh mass, even briefly. Historians examining similar incidents later emphasized that such moments, though small in scale, had disproportionate effects on morale. German units noted the unpredictability of isolated American soldiers. Allied troops, in turn, internalized the lesson. Survival often depended on calm observation, quick decision-making, and exploiting even the slightest error in the enemy's assumption. By nightfall, the forest fell silent once more. Patrols moved cautiously through the area, and word of the encounter traveled through chain-of-command reports. Yet in private, the soldiers who witnessed it spoke of it in hushed tones, aware that this brief minute of violence had altered perceptions far more than the maps or marching orders ever could. And that alteration of perception, small but enduring, set the stage for the wider consequences of the engagement, on units, on morale, and on how the war would be remembered. In less than a minute, assumptions shattered, numbers flipped, and control vanished. 21 enemy soldiers fell, but the story isn't in the count, it's in the seconds that decided life and death. Calm, trained, and precise, one soldier turned capture into survival, fear into chaos. The snow would melt, the forest reclaim itself, and the war would march on. But that frozen moment, brutal and exact, proves one truth. In war, a single act of discipline can change everything.